Hey Rockies fans, I'm Matt Gross, aka the Rhode Island Rocky fan, and welcome to another episode of Purple Row Video as we try to discuss and dissect the circus act that went down yesterday with the Dexter Fowler trade and the Justin Morneau signing, all connected, which we'll get to here in just a moment. But absolutely brutal. You see this trade pop up. When you first read the news, the Rockies trade Dexter Fowler to Houston for Jordan Lyles and outfielder Brandon Barnes, and you're just waiting for another name to pop up or something, because you just don't feel that the return is anywhere near enough for Dexter Fowler, for your best trade piece that you had in the offseason. And you're saying you've got to be kidding me when you saw those names come in, because it's just not nearly enough. Now, there is a way where I think this trade could actually end up working out for the Rockies, which I'll get to in the second half of this video. But, they are really, really rolling the dice that they can make Jordan Lyles into an above-average pitcher, because anything short of that happening, and this trade is an unmitigated disaster. But the biggest reason why I think I'm upset, and so many other fans are upset, is that when you look at what Dexter Fowler provided for the Rockies, he gave you something that you're already kind of lacking, and you'd be hesitant to deal. That doesn't mean that he should have been off limits, that he shouldn't have been traded at all. We discussed this in the Dexter Fowler Dilemma Rock Pile, a couple weeks ago, where Fowler had some interesting qualities that made sense to hold on to him, but at the end of the day, you'd be willing to trade him for something useful, particularly an established major league starting pitcher, because the Rockies had such a big hole there and had a little bit of outfield depth that you say, okay, we'll get rid of him. But when you look at, but only if you had a decent return. This does not qualify as that decent return. But when you look at Fowler, the two biggest things that concern you right off the bat is, number one, is the on base percentage that you'll lose with him going out the door. The Rockies have four guys who can get on base last year. They had Tulowitzki, Cuddyer, Cargo, and Fowler. That was it. Tulowitzki and Cuddyer well above average last year at 391, 389. They were great at getting on base. Then you had Cargo and Dexter, 369 on base for Cargo, 367 for Dex, solidly above average. Everybody else, 336 on base percentage or lower. And 336 is pretty much average when you play at Coors Field. And even the league average has dropped to around 320. We know with that bump that you get from Coors Field with all the hits falling in, that 336 is probably right around. They had four guys. Any way you slice it, they had four guys who could get on base last year. And they probably need more in that category. Now you drop that number down to 3, and you're really hurting in that category. Now, maybe Corey Dickerson can jump into that role. He's a guy who might be an above average on base guy in the future. Maybe Arenado can hit over 300 and get on base. Well, that's really asking a lot, because he doesn't walk much, so I don't think that's going to turn around overnight. Maybe Justin Morneau with his new signing can, recapture his 06 through 2010 days where he gets on base at a solidly above average clip. But right now, this team is sorely lacking an on-base option. And quite frankly, it brings up the next problem that several people were bringing up last night, is who hits leadoff? You look at this team, and Carlos Gonzalez now really is the guy that makes most sense for the leadoff spot, because he's the only other guy besides Tulowitzki and Gonzalez who can get on base. But that brings up its own set of problems, because now who's going to hit third? That opens up another issue. And if you don't have Gonzalez up there, then you're going to have significantly below average on base guys for batting leadoff. You might have got somebody average there, but you want somebody above average. So what you've done now is, if you leave Cargo, Tulo, and Cuddyer in the 3, 4, 5 area, you have now immediately impacted their production, because nobody is going to be on base for them to drive home. It's simple mathematics. There is nobody else who gets on base in the above average clip. This is one of the reasons why you're hesitant to deal Dexter Fowler. And the only reason why you would do it is if you had an established starting pitcher or some other really useful piece. Jordan Lyles and Brandon Barnes are not those pieces. There is no way around that. Unless they see something in Lyles that everybody else missed, and they can turn him into an above-average pitcher. If they do that, then my hat's off to them. Then we all look like idiots. But unless that happens, that's a pretty significant bet to make. They're gonna have big issues, because if they have big issues at the 4 and 5 slots in the rotation again, for the third year in a row, where it's an embarrassing level. I don't necessarily think it's gonna be that bad, but if they do, there is gonna be a firestorm of biblical proportions surrounding this organization. But if you have that, plus you don't have guys who can get on base, you have a big problem. That's the other problem with losing Fowler, which we talked a little bit about a couple weeks ago, is he is the only guy left, besides Helton, who's retired, who could really pile up pitches per plate appearance. You know, we talked about how with that stat, it's kind of a weird one, because you think that, you know, there'd be a big difference between the guys who pile up pitches per plate appearance and the guys who don't, where actually it's very, very close. A guy who, you know, averages 4.1 pitches per plate appearance sees many more pitches than the average guy, and a guy who's down maybe 3.4 pitches per plate appearance is well below, where the average tends to come out somewhere around 3.6, 3.7. So with Fowler and Helton were being the only guys who are consistently above 4 on this team, you suddenly have nobody who is well above average. You have a couple guys who can get up there with Kadire, with Tulowitzki now is trying to become more patient. Corey Dickerson might be able to get there. But this team now is going to have a serious problem piling up pitches. And that also becomes a big problem, because if you remember last year, the Rockies have a lot of games where they'd be facing a starter, and the starter would get into the 7th or 8th inning only with 85 pitches. It happened rather frequently where the other starters just completely shut them down. Well, when you don't have guys who can pile up pitches per plate appearance, that becomes a big problem, because whenever you run into a guy who's pitching well, you're never going to get him out of the game. Which then you have to win 2-1, 3-2 type games, which the Rockies really can't do on a night in, night out basis. They might be able to do it sometime when you get a great performance out of Chacin or De La Rosa or Chatwood or whoever, but it really requires perfection. If they run into one of those guys on the night when one of the big three are not pitching, well, you might as well go find something else to do, because they're not winning that game. The game's over once that happens. So those are pretty much the issues you have with Fowler, is that you just cannot believe that the Rockies gave Dexter Fowler up for this return. An established on-base percentage center fielder in this day is very, very hard to find. And I'm not trying to tell you that Dexter Fowler is Jacoby Ellsbury. Ellsbury is a much better player. He's just got 7 years and $153 million on the free agent market. And this is what Fowler lands? I mean, I understand his value may be diminished in injury. You cannot tell me that they could not have gotten more for Dexter Fowler. I just can't believe it. I mean, Seattle is dying for offense in the outfield. You probably could have called them and just give me your best offer, not even push buttons, and gotten a bigger haul than this. Maybe not necessarily one that fit needs, but you could have. But I just can't believe that the value was this low for Fowler. I can guarantee that there's teams out there saying, boy, I wish we could have topped that offer. We could have gotten Dexter Fowler for that. I mean, we would have liked to have traded for less value than that than gotten into, Curtis Granderson, Nelson Cruz sweepstakes, or whoever else they might be looking at in free agency. I mean, just unbelievable that they gave him away for this low value. Now, with that said, because I don't like the deal at all, because I don't think that Jordan Lyles can become an above average starting. I don't think he will. I think he can become an above average starting pitcher. I don't think he will. But there is a scenario here where the Rockies could come out smelling like roses amazingly. And that is if they are correct in their gamble that they can make Jordan Lyles an above average pitcher. That's pretty much the only way this deal makes sense. And the only thing I can think of is that they're looking at their big three in Chacin, De La Rosa, and Chatwood, and they're saying, well, we brought Chacin up through our system. We turned De La Rosa into the pitcher he is because he wasn't good before he came here in 2008. We were able to take Chatwood, who struggled and was rushed to the majors with the Angels, and turn him into it and allowed him to have the year he had last year. Now we're going to do it again with Jordan Lyles, because they want to come off as, you know, looking like the smartest guy in the room, saying, hey, look, now we have three-fifths of our rotation are above average, and look what we can do. Because clearly they see something in Lyles that they think they can get significantly better production out of him than what he's shown so far. Otherwise, there's no way you make this move. That's the only thing I can think of. And if that were to happen, then, you know, then that's your established starter. That you would have gotten. Lyles is not an established, you know, solid starter right now, but he would fill that void that you were looking for, in other words. So if you can somehow get that type of return with Jordan Lyles, then absolutely the deal makes sense. But I'm just not sure that anybody has faith that that's going to happen. Now, the other part of the deal that I actually like much better, or the other part of the deal that makes the other thing much better, is the Justin Morneau side. This deal coupled with the Justin Morneau signing, in terms of how it relates to Brandon Barnes, actually also makes sense. That's going to be a pleasant surprise to some people. And what I mean specifically by that is that Justin Morneau, as we know, if you looked at the splits, absolutely cannot hit left-handed pitching. He is a monster against right-handed pitching, even in the last few years when his overall numbers are mediocre, but he simply cannot hit left-handed pitching. If you look at Brandon Barnes' numbers, you look and say, oh, this guy's just a terrible, you know, all-glove, no-bat outfielder, which is true on the surface. But when you start digging a little more, you see that Brandon Barnes is actually a close to league average bat when he's batting right-handed. The problem is, okay, we talk about when he's facing left-handed pitchers. Oh, he's a pure right-handed hitter. He doesn't switch hit. But he is significantly better against left-handed pitching than he is against right-handed pitching, to the tune of 200 OPS points. And I looked at his minor league numbers as well, you know, going back to 2011, and he has that same split going back to the start of the 2011 season, where they have these splits. Brandon Barnes has a 942 OPS against left-handed pitchers in the minors, and a 744 OPS against right-handed pitchers in the minors. Now, that does not mean he's going to put up those numbers, but the point is that there's still that 200-point OPS gap when you look at Brandon Barnes' numbers, which is exactly what you're looking for. Because if the Rockies play this properly, and this is a big if, again, otherwise this trade is even worse than I originally thought, which is frightening if that's the case. But if they use if they use the Morneau and Brandon Barnes pieces properly, which I'm thinking they is their plan, because they made these moves together, then it could actually work out. Then that compartment of the deal could work out. The rest of it could still be an unmitigated disaster, but this could be a pleasant surprise, in that if you only start Morneau in about 110 games, because typically you get 2/3 of your games, about 108 games or so are going to be against right-handers, and about the other 54 are going to be against left-handed starters. It generally works out a 2-to-1 ratio, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but a 2-to-1 ratio is generally a pretty fair expectation. So if you say, hey, we're going to start Justin Morneau only against right-handed starters, and then on the days where you have a left-handed starter, you slide Kadire over from right field, you have him start at first base, Kadire kills lefties, and then insert Brandon Barnes into a corner outfield position, because at Coors Field it doesn't matter if it's a corner outfield, because there's so much ground to cover. You need defense. You need Brandon Barnes' defense, which, by the way, is well above average. You can just go over to the Astros side at Crawford boxes, and you would not believe some of the GIFs or the GIFs, whatever you want to call, however you pronounce it, however you choose to pronounce it, you would not believe some of the plays this guy makes on an everyday basis. I was watching some of the games last night. This guy is well above average. He will cover a ton of ground at Coors Field. So you combine his defense with his ability to hit left-handed pitching, all of a sudden, now that really works out. Because if you can remove, this is addition by subtraction, if you remove Morneau's plate appearances against left-handed pitchers, and you remove Barnes' plate appearances against right-handed pitchers, all of a sudden, right field and first base are both going to be well above average at the plate. If you have Morneau only start against right-handers and then have Cuddyer go against all the left-handers, I guarantee you're getting an OPS over 850 from first base. It might be over 900. That is not out of the question at all. Which is why a lot of you look at some of these ZiPS projections on Justin Morneau, and it says, well, 0.8, 0.9 WAR, wins above replacement. I can guarantee you that if it would be closer to 2 if you just isolated his at-bats against left-handed, at-bats against right-handed pitchers and at-bats against left-handed pitchers, because he's probably a couple of wins above replacement against right-handed pitchers and a win below replacement when he's facing left-handed pitchers. Morneau is awful against left-handed pitchers, but you can see how this would work out. And then your other option, if you want to give Cuddyer some days off, which you do against some right-handed pitchers, you could just completely load the lineup up with lefties. If you have a right-handed starter who struggles, if you're facing a right-handed starter who struggles against lefties, you can put Morneau at first base, you can have Cargo in center, and then you can put both Corey Dickerson and Charlie Blackmon at the corners, and all of a sudden you've got a lineup littered with left-handed, which is going to become a problem. So if, this is a big if, the Rockies use these pieces correctly, that part of the deal could actually work out. The Brandon Barnes coupled with Justin Morneau works if it's used correctly, which, interestingly enough, also is going to put a lot more pressure on Walt Weiss to make the correct moves. Because last year, our manager didn't really have any moves to make. He had no options on the bench, so pretty much anything he did was going to be wrong because he had no weapons to work with. Now, he has a situation where the way he inserts these players and the way he distributes playing time is going to have a very large impact on the success of his team. So in that sense, it's actually a very interesting, signing and work together. So I actually like the Brandon Barnes coupled with Justin Morneau. I just hate that it's part of the overall Dexter Fowler deal. That is what I cannot stand about this whole thing. They should have done, because Brandon Barnes' value is not going to be very high, and you probably could have gotten Rafael Ortega for Brandon Barnes and just signed Justin Morneau and done it that way. That's what you should have. I mean, I don't know if that would work out perfectly, but it's he's a young cross control guy who, the Astros can stick in center field. And by the way, the other thing about this whole deal doesn't make sense. And I hate, what are the Astros doing acquiring Dexter Fowler? So now you can lose 97 games instead of 100? They make no sense across the board. Unless they're gonna flip him for a better package they just gave away. That makes sense. That's what I thought they were gonna do. Most of the people in the Astros organization seem to imply they're gonna keep him. I mean, I don't know why you would, because you're going to have to pay him a gigantic sum of money as soon as you're supposed to be good. So I don't understand it from that aspect either, but just a very weird, very wacky chain of events. It does free up a little bit more money, because so maybe the Rockies are going to have some. I just don't see how you can get anybody, unless there's some other trade involved that's unforeseen, which is always possible in the Major League Baseball offseason. You learn to never underestimate anything, but really you just kind of have money to, sign a couple more relievers, and, that's it. If you're only going to have a payroll around 90, 95 million. If you're going to push it beyond that, then that changes things, but we'll see what happens if they elect to, trade some people, if the Rockies elect to, just sign a couple bullpen pieces. You like established starters, there really aren't any out there. And then you throw in the fact of how expensive they'd be and how difficult it would be to get them to come to Coors Field. That probably is out the window. And then the other option, I guess, would be to use it to hand out, hand out deals to your own players, like a Yoli Chacin or Willie Rosario, or even, lock up Nolan Arenado for his, arbitration years right now. Just go do something like that. Maybe entice him with more money up front since he's cheaper in the latter half of the decade. I don't know. But that is probably a discussion for another day. Those are my instant thoughts, and then I hope I covered everything. I'm sure, there's plenty more to get into, which we will in the threads, and we'll have more updates here on Football Row. So stay tuned. That is where we stand right now with this trade. Hopefully, for the Rockies' sake, Jordan Lyles can become an above-average pitcher, because if he doesn't, this trade is a total disaster.